Welcome to Health Stealth Radio, where we move away from the mundane to gather insights from the shadows of enterprise and patient cybersecurity. Yes, we surely believe that traditional themes like endpoint software and zero trust are critical, but given massive advances in AI, remote and wearable device hacking, and data hostage negotiators, there's a much darker side to cybersecurity, and not everyone is quite willing to talk about it in public. Health Stealth Radio will thrive on these topics and encourage fireside spats to debate them. Here's your host, Frank Cutitta.
I'd like to welcome you to Health Stealth Radio. This is Insights from the Shadows of Healthcare Cybersecurity. And today we have as our guests two of CHIME's finest in terms of their work with the government sector. We have Mari Savickis and Chelsea Arnone. And in my old country, we'd say Arnone, but we'll keep it at Arnone today. They head up the foreign affairs team, or the federal affairs team at CHIME. For those of you who don't know, the CHIME is the College of Healthcare Information Management Executives. Today's topic is the much-awaited federal cybersecurity policy for health, released in Washington last week after numerous delays as a result of weather, as I understand it. So they could tell that for themselves. Anytime somebody says federal affairs and policy and legislation, you could eyes glazing over. Fortunately, on radio, you can't see that. But these ladies have assured me they're going to keep this lively. I know that they will because I know their personality. They're sassy and they're good in terms of the work that they do. What I'd like them to do is to first introduce themselves and each give me just a short day in the life from you. And we also like to keep the work-life balance in this too. So tell us what you like to do. You're not hounding legislators. Chelsea?
So I am the director here at CHIME. I have been in government relations starting on the Hill since about 2008, sometime now. And in my spare time, which I have little of now more and more, I like to go fishing.
Wow, impressive. Mari?
Well, hi, thanks, Frank. I am the head of government affairs for CHIME, and in my spare time, I teach yoga and take yoga.
Fantastic. So the reason this interview first came about was there was an interesting story, Axios, that gave some attribution to CHIME and the folks that we have here on the call related to healthcare devices and the cyber risk of healthcare devices. This won't be an entire radio show on healthcare device vulnerability, but at the same time, it is sort of interesting and unnerving what's happening out there with these devices and why government would need to get involved in something like that. I think it's probably a pretty obvious answer, but at the same time, maybe Chelsea, you could give us a little indication of how this whole medical device thing came about and where you see the risks.
So this came about with the Patch Act, which is CHIME-supported, long-fought legislation that was finally passed in 2022. And it includes a lot of new important cybersecurity requirements for medical device manufacturers. And this is because the FBI and GAO reports have found that scary numbers, 6.2 vulnerabilities are per medical device, and recalls have been issued for critical devices such as pacemakers and insulin pumps with known security issues. So that comes down to, challenges that remain with what are known as legacy devices. So the FDA and international regulators, that a legacy device is a medical device that cannot be reasonably protected against current cybersecurity threats. This could be because device design or lack of maintenance for cybersecurity. And because they cannot be reasonably protected, they're more vulnerable than other devices, which increases risk to the hospital network and other devices on the same network. So this is something the entire healthcare sector, providers and manufacturers of devices are going to need to work together to remedy, and challenges just remain in managing the risk of legacy devices. The Patch Act really took us a step further for new devices on the market, but there are legacy devices that still need to be dealt with. Mari, did I miss anything?
Interesting. So I just not to be naive, but I mean, I'm assuming that somebody would hack into these devices using some kind of other device. Is that where the risk lies?
Absolutely. There are lots of ways that they can get into these devices. And there are some that are just no post-market updates, so their software is ancient.
Interesting. We just had a previous episodes, we had somebody from ISAC talking about how hacktivism has become prevalent, especially as a result of what's happening in Israel, Ukraine. So, and that the Israeli companies are especially prone to that. So, this is a global problem, obviously not a U.S. problem. So the main part of the program here today is related to another policy or legislation that's just come out. I guess it's policy at this point. A lot of interesting things about this. One wonders, first of all, it's not quite over yet. I think there's a lot of public comment. So I'm wondering, Mari or Chelsea, whoever would like to go first, if you could explain the most current legislation just sort of released last week after, like I said, a couple snow delays and legislative problems. So how would you best describe this legislation related to healthcare cybersecurity that came out?
I can start, Frank. Well, so first of all, it's not legislation. It is simply sub-regulatory guidance at this point, which that's an unsexy way of saying that it's not a law, right? It's something that the agency, Department of Health and Human Services has put out, and they put it out in a voluntary form. But if you go back, I always like to bring us back into the time machine. Like, how do we get here? So HHS just releases, again, following many delays because we have like one snowplow in Washington. So we finally get this out the door. It was supposed to be released in December. Then it was like, yeah, then, snow. Finally, okay, it comes out. And it says there's 20, and I'll let Chelsea elaborate on what these are in a moment, 20 voluntary CPGs. So CPG is like a new acronym to our lexicon. If you're like, wait, what is this? I'll just tell you so you don't have to go look it up. Cybersecurity performance goals, right? And they're voluntary. So this is the government's way of nudging us forward as an industry. So if you look back over several years, our industry was not in a coordinated state. We were not all swimming in the same direction. Cybersecurity was not a priority for the healthcare sector. But we hit reboot a few years ago. And I think, to use an old saying, we've come a long way, baby. We have come a long way. Does it mean it's perfect? No, it does not. Does it mean that we're making a lot of improvements and working together? Yes, it does. So this is one step in that journey. If you think about it as a journey, and the administration is very focused. The White House is very focused on the attacks that have been very public, both within our sector and outside of our sector. Hello, anyone? Colonial Pipeline, that ring a bell, right? So you can't have hospitals without water. You can't have hospitals without electricity. We're all very connected. And so when some very public attacks occurred in hospitals, that got the attention of the White House, who in turn pushed forward to say, we've got to make this a priority. So we're very grateful, but it will journey. And I know we're going to get into the meat and potatoes, right? Or the pasta. If you're Italian, like I am, we're going to get into it in a second. So maybe Chelsea, you want to add on anything I had to say about the CPGs, the new acronym?
Fun new acronym, because we needed one more. I would just say that they're divided into 10 essential and 10 enhanced, meaning 10 is like the basics you should do. 10 is if you want to go above and beyond and be an overachiever in cybersecurity and improve the sector's posture. And they might be easier for larger organizations to achieve. They might already be doing these things. And some of them, the lesser resourced may not, may be a little bit of a struggle to get there, but they'll get there.
So first of all, this sounds something like a maturity model. So it is maybe a bad metaphor that you start out at the basics and move up. You might be cringing when I say that, but I'm just saying that you go from 0 to stage 6 or something like that, like the MRM. What are some of the elements of these performance indicators, and who looks at them?
Let me start with the high level, and then we can dig down into the trenches here. So these are predicated on some best practices. So again, going back in the time machine, go back, 2015, CISA, the Cybersecurity Information, I think, Sharing Act of 2015. Don't quote me acronym, because all we do is talk in acronyms all day. I'm sure Chelsea will correct me. CISA 2015 had a provision in there that says, listen, HHS, we need you to work with the sector and develop some voluntary, I'm emphasizing voluntary cybersecurity best practices for healthcare. So a lot has happened between 2015 and today, and what was released last week builds upon these voluntary set of best practices that were co-developed in conjunction with the industry, meaning our side, meaning non-government, and the government. So together, we work together, collaboratively develop these. They're in use today in a voluntary manner. So I'll just stop there and let Chelsea build upon the voluntary nature and what these are actually predicated on.
So the law that you were talking about is the Cybersecurity Information Sharing Act of 2015. So I don't think you were far off. I think you got it. And so these are mapped, right, to current documents that a lot of organizations are currently using. NIST, for example, which is another acronym alphabet soup, and also the HSCC Cyber Working Groups. Hiccup? Is that what they're tied to, Mark? Because I'm blanking right now. So
it's Hiccup. It sounds like a bodily function, but it is the nickname for the best practices is Hiccup. You almost need a dictionary to talk in our language, and after a while, you start saying to yourself, like, you don't even know what the name of the real law is. You're just like, yeah, it's patch. It's like it's CISA. It's this. It's that. I mean, it's just too long because these things do not. Let's be honest, they don't roll off the tongue. Okay, you have 405D is the big program, right? There's a big program now inside of HHS that all spun out of that law in 2015. Hey, create these voluntary best practices. Great. 2015. And now we have them. They're being used by many providers voluntarily, right? Then along comes the government and says like, hey, you guys should be doing a little bit more, everyone. Hey, let's all swim in the same direction. Let's tie, these best practices to the 405D stuff, which they call it Hiccup. It's we can give you all the acronym soup at the end. Greg, if you want to throw something up on the screen. Boom, boom, boom. You want to be like cyber ninja acronym
We
master?
have no screen here.
Well, right at the very end, your little screenshot. We will give you the acronym soup. Any reader who wants to like get into the nuts and bolts of acronyms in healthcare, I mean, we'll give a link to
the glossary. We'll give a link to the
glossary.
glossary.
Cybersecurity practices. Hiccup.
Hiccup, I love. I'll be using that like I know it.
All voluntary today. And I did have another little fun fact for you is, and I'm sure that Chelsea's going to get into this in a moment, is HIPAA security rule. You're like, what does this have to do with Hiccup? Oh, we'll tell you. But here's the fun fact before I let Chelsea dive into the meat and potatoes, is the proposed rule. It looks like it was published for the first time, wait for it, everyone, August 12th, 1998. Some of you are probably wondering about what. So that's how long ago that was that was a proposed piece. So the rules they've been updated like, a few times in recent history, but not very recent. So there's something I'm teeing it up here for Chelsea about HIPAA security.
Why is Mari talking about the HIPAA security rules? So with these sector CPGs for our sector, health and public health care, and we have a lot of carts before horses here, which is not very uncommon here in DC, but we don't really know exactly how they're going to enforce implementation precisely, but we're going to take some educated guesses. OCR is planning on reopening the HIPAA security rule in a proposed regulation later this year. I believe it's slated for August, but the unified in which these regulations that are planned are timed out. They don't have to abide by that schedule. Sometimes they're most of the time they're much later. So sometime towards the end of this year, we will see the HIPAA security rule reopened, and we are expecting to see the as part of these HPH CPGs in that rulemaking.
This is when you insert dramatic music like dun dun dun.
No, I'm gonna insert. You're listening to Health Stealth Radio on the Healthcare Now Radio Syndicate. Today's guests are Mary Savickis and Chelsea Arnone, who head up the Federal Affairs team at CHIME, the College of Healthcare Information Management Executives. Today's topic is the much-awaited federal healthcare cybersecurity policy released in Washington last week. So anyway, let me jump in after that, and ask. I just like to be annoying, and I have been in everyone I've said this to. I said this quacks and walks like the meaningful use policy of cybersecurity. Shakes her head and said, "Don't say that." And I could see people shaking their finger at me. Maybe it's not. But the reason I ask that is because we have these guidelines now that are out there. And then one of the legislative bullet points is that the government will provide resources to incentivize and implement cybersecurity practices. So it begs the question of this word incentivize and provide resources. And I might be putting the cart way before the horse. Chelsea or Mari, what's the incentivization part that you see in this? And it's not there already, and that would be Chelsea.
Yeah, it's not there. And that, I think Mari will tell you, is why it is not at all like meaningful use, because meaningful use actually provided financial incentives for providers before they implemented meaningful use. And a lot of people are very triggered by meaningful use and have some PTSD, especially Mari, I know. But the biggest problem facing our sector right now is the lack of funding and resources, especially for those that have the safety net hospitals and the rurals that are often caring for the most vulnerable patients. They're operating on razor slim margins, just keeping the doors open and hopefully the lights on. So cyber safety is safety, but in order to get financial incentives, you need Congress. And I've gotten approved statements from our congressional counterpart, Cassie. While the House Speaker Johnson has been very clear that any new programs that are passed in this year's Congress need to have an offset, meaning they need to have what's known as a pay for. So something needs to pay for them. I don't know how much this is going to cost. I cannot imagine it will be a small amount. So I think, unfortunately, but realistically, Congress is highly unlikely to pass a package that includes cybersecurity funding for hospitals and health systems this year, regardless of how they make this glide path with CPGs. Mara, you want to tack on any more doom and gloom or maybe some happiness?
Yeah, I think one thing I'd say is that usually our members do just about anything the government asks them to do. It's just that they need the right amount of time to do it. And so it needs to be sequenced in a manner that is not overly aggressive should this, push come to shove and this turns into mandates. So we'll be keeping a really close eye on that because Chelsea noted the climate in Washington to receive additional funding is not very favorable right now. We're also in an election year, so the probability of security rule coming out this year, very, very high. I would say a lot. In other years, it might be like, oh, we're thinking about fall, and then fall turns into like next spring, and it goes on and on. That's not the case in an election year. They're going to push these things out lickety split. And so we will have a better sense of timing should there be some mandates in there. But either way, we're going to need a sequence runway because this is only one set of potential that our members are actually wrestling with. There's a whole other host of things inside the digital health and health IT ecosystem that are not directly related to cyber that must be met. Chelsea's intimately aware.
And there are other cyber directly related provisions that they're going to have to comply with soon from the Certia law that was passed in March.
Certia law. Okay. Sister of Hiccup, right?
It was passed in March of 2022, actually. So this is pretty quick for some rulemaking to get turned around. So CHIME responded to the Department of Homeland Security, DHS's, their sub-agency, CISA, request for information last year, November 2022. Oh my gosh, it's been a while. So we responded to that, and that was just to gauge the industry's reaction on how they're going to propose this rule this year. It's slated for March. It's already under review at the White House, which is the final stage before it's released. So I would not be shocked if they kind of stick to that timeline. So the proposed rule, which requires CISA to implement the law's requirements that covered entities, meaning critical infrastructure owners and operators that experience a cyber incident, they have to report these to the agency no later than 72 hours after they reasonably believe that it has occurred. Further, if they make a ransomware payment, they must report the payment no later than 24 hours after it was made. So,
well, how did they come up with 72 hours?
Pulled that out of a hat.
Okay.
Yeah.
Really? Okay. Because it seems, I'm not a CISO, but it seems a little bit ludicrous that 72 hours would be the number when it's having an immediate effect.
Yeah, and we mentioned that in our response to the RFI that patient safety comes first.
Oh, do you? Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. It doesn't matter. 72 hours sort of silly when you're, in a situation where you're unplugging everything and trying to make sure everything still works.
Right, an entire operating room goes down,
first.
and
So that's
we'll wait 3 days
right.
before we bring you back.
No, it'll take as it takes for us to ensure patients are safe. and this is for all critical infrastructure, but I mean, I'm clearly biased, but we're the poorest and least resourced. So
I just have a rookie question here. I mean, we've got about 5 minutes. When you go and talk to members of Congress that might be physicians or healthcare professionals in a previous life, how do they, I mean, is it fair to say that most doctors would agree with this kind of policy? Or do you see pushback from people with that background?
Never met a provider who is like, I would like to invite a mandate into my life. I said, no provider ever. That is no. That's like me saying like I've met a carb that I didn't like. I like all carbs; they're tasty and delicious, but doctors do not like mandates. Okay, and hospitals, depending on the level of resource, if the smallest ones like they're just trying to get to nurses. To Chelsea's point, they're trying to get the nurses to show up, right? They're trying to find a cyber expert they can afford. Or if they here's yet your fifth hat that you're wearing today. Hi, I know that you from like being the chief information officer, but you're not the CISO, and you're also doing this, that, and other things. Our smallest folks are just struggling to deliver patient care, which is our primary responsibility. Our bigger ones, more sophisticated, they this in stride, and this is what you should do to cost of doing business, and it's the right thing to do for patients. And then there's the ones in between. This is going to be tough, but I probably can figure it out within a right glide path. But the individual practitioner, no one's ever said like, let me invite some more mandates into my life.
Okay, interesting. Okay, and to the other side of it, I mean, we talk about the offset thing, and one of the biggest problems that CISOs have in trying to get funding in their own providers is that it doesn't get offset with revenues. I mean, it's sort of revenue free, and it's basically a tax on the organization. So I can imagine trying to find an offset within the government is not going to be any easier to say, okay, well, this is going to produce tremendous amount of revenue for the government.
One that's palatable to us, right? Especially if it would be hurtful to us in other ways, and which is often what happens. And there's not a lot of information out there that pays for itself completely and also makes the government money. So it's
considered an unfunded mandate. That's the term du jour in Washington when the government does not attach money, which usually doesn't attach money, if I'm being honest. The one place you might see maybe some savings, I say potentially, I think we'd have to talk about this a little bit more with our members, is maybe on your cyber insurance, right? If you start following a dedicated set of practices, then I could see that maybe at least leveling out, but it's not like you're going to get some amazing bargain. I can't imagine.
Or a check from or HHS saying, congratulations, thanks so much for doing this. We appreciate it.
Yeah, and they haven't had too much such success with the prescription side of that in saving people money. So it's that's something to be desired. We have 2 minutes left. I mean, can you give us sort of a view of other aspects of this policy or other things that we should keep our eyes open for? I mean, there must be something out there on artificial intelligence you guys are looking at or something like that. We can't have a radio show without saying the word artificial intelligence at least once. It's required.
You've ruined this now for me because I just finished reading a nearly 1,000 page, and by reading, I mean deciphering and reading regulation called AI1 from our friends at ONC, the Office of the National Coordinator for Health IT. It's a doozy.
It's a big one.
Member alert and cheat sheet will be coming. We've distilled it to about 32 pages, just shy of that. So it's got a lot of implications for AI used in healthcare if you're using certified IT. So they are regulating all forms of AI, and they are calling it predictive decision support interventions, or DSI.
Is this one in the spirit of volunteerism as well, or is this got teeth in it?
It's absolutely required.
Okay.
A lot of transparency pieces.
I'm sorry, I'm just looking at volunteerism in cybersecurity. It just cracks me up.
Yeah, that's not a thing. So
Mhm.
the HTI one rule, I think, is going to be pretty wide sweeping, and they're already talking about HTI too. So I'm just going to mentally pretend
Interesting.
that that's not a thing.
Okay, great. Mari, any closing comments in the 30
I would
seconds
just
we have?
say, going back to your mention about meaningful use, you had the era of meaningful use. We're now entering like the decade of HTI-1 and cyber mandates. So that's where we are. So everybody strap in, brace for impact. We're moving into a
Fasten
different
your
decade.
seatbelts. Okay,
Fasten your
good to
seatbelt.
know. Well, I'd like to thank you so much. It was lively. I didn't think it ever could be that lively about this kind of legislation, or it's not legislation, or policies, or recommendations, or volunteer programs. So I'd like to thank you for joining us here on Health Stealth Radio. Please tune in every week where we'll be having new episodes. And thank you for joining us. Thank you, ladies.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
Thank you for joining us today in the shadows for this episode of Health Stealth Radio with Frank Cutitta. If you like the program, please be sure to share your comments on our social media sites, or feel free to contact us with suggestions for new and stealthy show themes. We look forward to welcoming you again for our next broadcast. In the meantime, stay safe out there.